الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. قال الله في كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر ولله عاقبة الأمور. صدق الله العلي العظيم وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. 1,000 years ago, a famous classical Arab poet by the name of Abu Firas al-Hamdani wrote some lines of poetry eulogizing and praising the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And in that, a couple of lines are dedicated to Al-Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam and his son Al-Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salam, in which he says, ليس الرشيد كموسى في القياس ولا مأمونكم كالرضا إن أنصف الحكم. And in that he is drawing a comparison between who were at the time the political rulers, Rashid referring to Harun al-Abbasi, and the second was al-Ma'mun, drawing a comparison between those two and the Imams of their time, Imam Musa al-Kadhim and Al-Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. And he says that if you were to be fair in your comparison, there is no comparison between Musa and the one that you call al-Rashid, and no comparison between al-Rida and al-Ma'mun. And Abu Firas al-Hamdani was a poet, but he was also politically involved in that he was the cousin of Sayf al-Dawla al-Hamdani, of the Hamdani dynasty that lasted for about 100 years, from the year 895 Common Era to the year 1002, and they ruled in an area which corresponds today with the north of Iraq and Syria and the south of Turkey. And by belief, they were Shia, they were Ithna Ashari, the followers of Ahlul Bayt. And so his way of criticizing Banu al-Abbas was to write poetry in honor of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So he says that really there's no comparison. And it's very interesting because in retrospect, when you look at Orientalists and historians and what they say about the government of Banu al-Abbas, they refer to that era as the Islamic Golden Age. Golden because it was at the height and the zenith of the rule of the Islamic Empire, which stretched beyond the borders of the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East all the way to China, to the Caucasus, what is present-day Russia, and North Africa into also what is present-day Europe. And in terms of intellectual advancement, literary and philosophical advancement, it corresponded with the time where papyrus, paper, was introduced in the Islamic Empire. And so you had the mass translation of texts from Persian and Sanskrit and Greek into the Arabic language. It corresponded with the establishment of Baytul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which some refer to as the Grand Library of Baghdad, that served as the center of learning and teaching until the year 1258 when it was sacked by the Mongols. So when you look at it from a historical perspective, they refer to that as the Golden Age, when Europe was in the Dark Ages. When in Europe there was nothing on philosophy, there was nothing on literature. You had these little kingdoms that were, not advanced, they were backwards and they were fighting one another. There was no advancement at all. Disease and plague running rampant. But he says that even in that comparison, even if you were to take all of that into consideration, there is still no comparison between the true leaders, which are represented in the persons of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and these guys. And when we look at power, when we look at influence and sovereignty, we tend to consider the external aspects of influence, such as what? Position, status, wealth, command. That's what we tend to think of when we think of influence, or when we tend to think of mulk, sovereignty. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes to whom true sovereignty belongs. الَّذِينَ إِن مَكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. He describes people who, if we gave them sovereignty, tamkeen, which is empowerment, establishment, influence, sovereignty, أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. They receive it with the purpose of establishing prayer, which is the pillar of the faith, and zakat, which is another pillar of the faith. وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. They enjoin that which is good and they forbid that which is evil. وَلِلَّهِ عَاقِبَةُ الْأُمُورِ. That at the end of the day, all of the affairs and true sovereignty goes back to the maker, the creator, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever power and influence and authority that you have is relative, and it is temporary. It's said that during the final hours of the life of Harun, you know, this man who was so he saw himself in such a supreme way, almost like how the Fir'aun saw himself. But during those final hours, when his illness overcame him and he realized he was powerless, he began to recite some verses from the Quran. مَا أَغْنَى عَنِّي مَالِيَهْ هَلَكَ عَنِّي سُلْطَانِيَهْ. That my mal, my wealth, it did not really enrich me. Because now I'm finding that my health is slipping from my fingers and my money is not doing anything for me. هَلَكَ عَنِّي سُلْطَانِي. My sultan, my authority and my sovereignty is now collapsing. And there's really nothing left for me. So the Quran says that there are those that if we give them power and if we give them authority, they do the right things with it. And there are plenty of examples in the Quran. So a prime example is the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, Joseph. And chapter number 12 of the Quran is dedicated in its entirety to describing the story of Yusuf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ يَتَبَوَّأُ مِنْهَا حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ. That we established him, we makkanna, meaning that we established him. We gave him sovereignty in a way that he can travel throughout the land wherever he wanted, and he can plant his flag and live there. You know, some people have so much, in today's world, if you're not tied down to a particular work or an occupation and you have a lot of money and you have the right passport, you can travel anywhere in the world and you can live anywhere that you want. And some people, they don't even live in one place. They live like on a boat and just travel wherever they want. And the Quran is saying that Allah is saying that we gave Yusuf this kind of power, this kind of authority. But it wasn't because of the money that he had, it's because of the makana that we conferred upon him, us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was a person who, his internal strength and his internal authority and his internal mastery preceded his external position. And many times people they want external authority when they do not have internal mastery. So you read his story and you find that he passed a number of tests. Number one, he was tossed into the darkness of a well. And then he was sold into slavery. And then he was seduced by the wife of the highest minister. And then he was thrown in jail for years, where he spent. And after that, it was only after that he passed those tests one by one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw him worthy of that sultan, of that tamkeen, that sovereignty. So internally, he had conquered himself before externally God had given him the appearance of success. There's a dua that I came across, and this is narrated from our sixth Imam, Al-Imam Ja'far bin Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And in this hadith, he describes to us the dua, the supplication that Yusuf spoke when he was in the darkness of the well. Because the Quran does not relate this dua, but it's narrated in the hadith. It says, عن الصادق عليه السلام أن جبرائيل قال ليوسف, the angel Gabriel, he came to Yusuf when he was in the darkness of the well. أن الله تعالى يقول لك, God says to you, ادعني بهذا الدعاء حتى أخرجك من الجب. God says to you, pray to me through this supplication so that I can help emerge you from the darkness of the well. So Yusuf asks, فَقَالَ لَهُ وَمَا الدُّعَاء? What is that supplication? فَقَالَ, he said, قُلْ, say the following, O Yusuf. اللهم إني أسألك بأن لك الحمد لا إله إلا أنت المنان بديع السماوات والأرض ذو الجلال والإكرام أن تصلي على محمد وآل محمد وأن تجعل لي مما أنا فيه فرجا ومخرجا. This was the dua. I have a copy of it, so first come, first serve. This was the dua that helped emerge Yusuf from the depths of the well out. And so sometimes we find ourselves in darkness. Sometimes we find ourselves struggling internally because of a social situation, relationship stuff that happens, financial stuff that hits us all of a sudden. And so because he was able to overcome those challenges, God gave him strength. He gave him sovereignty. He gave him power. So if we're looking to become people of influence, if we're looking for leadership, there's a process that has to take place before that, where you so to speak, jump through the hoops in order to prove that when you are given sovereignty, you can follow this verse. الَّذِينَ إِن مَكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Those, the people that we will give sovereignty, are the ones that will do the right thing when we give them sovereignty, when we give them influence. So when you've gone through those trials and those tribulations, you're more likely to do the right thing once you do have influence and once you do have authority. I mention this because in the case of our eighth Imam, Al-Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salam, there's a particular hadith. Because when he accepted to become the vice regent after Al-Ma'mun had summoned him. And he had said to him the following. He had said that, I want you to become my successor. I want you to become the regent after me. And we know that when Al-Ma'mun rose through the ranks and he became the political ruler, that it was during a time of turmoil. And so in order to secure his khilafah, in order to secure his authority, see the Banu al-Abbas worked a little bit differently than Banu Umayyah. Banu Umayyah, they openly persecuted the Ahlul Bayt. They had no problem with that at all. So Muawiyah, Yazid, all of the caliphs that came after, Marwan, Ibn al-Hakam, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, they openly persecuted them. Banu al-Abbas, they were a tad bit, I don't know if smarter is the word, maybe more cunning, because sometimes it's not smarter, it's just more cunning and more deceiving, right, and more scheming. They had the same goal, but they had a different tactic. They used a different vehicle. They said, you know what? let's bring them closer to us. Let's remind them of our relationship, that we're just cousins, and that we're looking after your best interests. That's why if you notice, geographically and strategically, the imams that lived during the times of Banu al-Abbas, which is the sixth imam onward, all of them were in different places. So the sixth imam, Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, buried in Medina. But once you go from the seventh imam onwards, they're either in Baghdad or Samarra or Mashhad, Tus, Khurasan. Because wherever the caliphs would travel to, they would bring them with them. They would summon them so that they can keep a close eye on them. So Al-Ma'mun seizes this opportunity. He says, you know what? Al-Ridha alayhi salam, he's influential. People like him in this part of the world, in Khurasan. There were a lot of followers of the Ahlul Bayt. He said, you know what? To fall in their favor, let me bring him on board. So he sends him a letter. He sends a letter to the Imam. He says, I want you to be my successor. The Imam sends a letter back. He says, listen. He says, if you claim that you are the divine successor and the representative of God, Khalifatullah, that's what they would call themselves. If you believe that you're a leader because God appointed you as a leader, then who are you to resign or pass on and transfer the leadership? See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in the Quran, لا ينال عهدي الظالمين. When He speaks about leadership and representation and khilafah, God refers to it as His covenant, ahdi. It's a covenant from God. So either it's a covenant from God, so you cannot resign or transfer it, or it's not a covenant from God. So the Imam is basically telling him, which one is it? You can't have both. But Al-Ma'mun insisted, and the Imam reluctantly went. Now a challenge that he faced is some people would say that, why would you, O son of Rasulullah, O grandson of Rasulullah, why would you go and side yourself with the oppressors? The Imam in a hadith explains what he did. He says, look, at least they are Muslim. At least they claim to follow the teachings of the religion of Islam. And then he brings the example of the Prophet Yusuf in the Quran. He says, look, Yusuf, he himself was a believer and he was a monotheist, but he placed himself at the service of whom? The Egyptians at that time, who were what? They were polytheists. They were mushrikeen. So which case is worse? Is it mine or them? So what the Imam was trying to convey is that, look, sometimes the situation is not ripe. And in fact, most of the time when you have an opportunity to do something good and influence people in a positive way, the circumstances are not always going to be ideal. You're not always going to have your ducks lined in a row in order for you to be able to do something good. Think about it. I mean, before you leave your house in the morning, you don't wait for all of the lights to turn green before you get in your car. That would be ridiculous. And so sometimes when we have an opportunity to do something good, we draw out these sort of mental blocks that I can't do it because of this and I can't do it because of that. The Imam, even though he knew that the caliph was an oppressor, he saw in his own capacity the ability to do good. So do good in your own capacity, even though the situation or your circumstance may not be ideal. So going back to that whole idea of having internal mastery versus external authority. There's a contemporary writer, he talks about when it comes to success, there's two things. There's the personality ethic and there's the character ethic. What's the difference between personality ethic and character ethic? Personality ethic corresponds with things like PR, public relations, management, communication. And as a person and as an organization, you need those things to be successful. The Prophet, he was a proper communicator. That had to do with personality. Musa alayhi salam, because he was a leader, he asked God to allow him to be a coherent communicator. This is why he said, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. That, oh Allah, open up my heart. I'm about to stand in front of the Pharaoh and his people. I need to deliver this powerful address. And he either had, his tongue was tied or he stuttered or he had a lisp or something like that. And he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve him of that temporarily so that he can deliver his message. So being a communicator is important, but more than personality ethic, we need to focus on character ethic. Because personality is your exterior. It's the face that you put on to the outside world. So when you're talking about, and if you've ever been in sales training or anything like that, they say, you know what, smile, engage the customer, this is all, it's great, but it's all personality ethic, it's not character ethic. Character ethic has to do with the person that you are on the inside. And you need character ethic in order for personality ethic to be truly effective. Because some people, they have personality ethic, but they don't have character ethic. They have charisma, they can deliver, they have a magnetic personality, but because the character ethic is lacking and it's not there, they don't do the right thing. And this happens in businesses, it happens even in religious organizations, it happens in families, it happens in relationships. So what happens in the corporate setting when you have a lot of personality ethic, you have all the trimmings of success, you have all the exterior, you have the money, you have all, but then you don't have people at the leadership who are doing the right thing. What do you get? You get Enron. Do you remember Enron? Anyone remember? In the year 2000, 2001, what happened with Enron? That's what happened. You had all the trimmings, the exterior trimmings of success, but people were not doing the right thing. So you have a collapse of almost an entire industry because they were a leader in their industry. And sometimes that can happen even in religious institutions. When people get caught up with personality ethic, but not with character ethic. And that's when you see like religious cults begin to emerge where people gather around one person and they begin to worship that person as if he is a god king. And then all of a sudden he loses his mind and he has everybody drink the poison Kool-Aid. That's what happens when you have personality ethic but no character ethic. In any religion, not just one specific religion. And that's why we need to look at character before we look at personality. Don't be fooled by personality. Personality is something which is very temporary. It's one day you have personality, one day you don't. But character refers to, accountability, integrity, fidelity. Those are things that don't necessarily come across with personality. Sometimes a person doesn't have the best personality. They don't know how to, for instance, smile on a regular basis, but they're trustworthy people because they have character ethic. They just need to start to develop their personality ethic. We learn from Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah wa salamu alayhi when he talks about leadership and character ethic. Sometimes a person can lose their mind, and so we get caught up with the person rather than the principle. And that's why he says in one of his narrations, he says, "Undur ila ma qal, wala tandur ila man qal." Look at what is being said rather than who is saying it. Because when you think about who is saying it, you get caught up in the game of, he said, she said, and it's not about the person. It's about what is being said. So it's not about who is right, it's about what is right. And it's tough because we're attracted as human beings, where initially our attraction does not come from character, it comes from personality. So you engage in a relationship with someone not because they're trustworthy, but because you like them, because they're attractive, because they're slick with their words, rather than looking at their character. Is this person a real trustworthy person? And we can go on, but that's just a basic sort of overview of that concept. So I mention that because when the Quran talks about authority and sovereignty and doing the right thing, that is a reflection of the character ethic which resides inside of the person. And that's why when you look at the example of the Prophet Yusuf in the Quran and how he averted his eyes and how he walked away from that temptation, the seduction, and how he did the right thing all the time, that speaks to us of character ethic. The same thing with our eighth Imam, Al-Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salam. He was a person of character ethic. So in reality, it did not matter whether he was the vice-regent, the successor to the caliph or not. He would have done the right thing. It just so happened that during his time, al-Ma'mun wanted him to become his, his personal representative. And that's what really made him so special. A couple of days ago during the Friday prayer, I mentioned the hadith that is mentioned in the book Uyun Akhbar al-Rida, which is really a treasure chest. It's a compilation of the narrations that describe Al-Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. And in one of those, one of the trusted companions, Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Nasr al-Bazanti, who was a companion of both the 8th and 9th Imams, he asks him, and for those who are not there, I'll just repeat the hadith. He asks him, he says, why was your father named Ar-Rida? And Ar-Rida refers to being in a state of content and or satisfaction. He says, we've heard, this is what he says. He says, we've heard it's because that Al-Ma'mun was satisfied enough with him to appoint him as his representative that he named him, Al-Ma'mun named him Ar-Rida. And that's where the name comes from. Ar-Rida was a very interesting name, by the way. It was not just the description, it was a name that was so exclusive to the Imam that for 3 or 4 generations after the Imams, meaning Al-Imam al-Jawad, Al-Imam al-Hadi, Al-Imam al-Askari, were sometimes referred to as Ibn al-Rida. Because he became so prominent, and because that title became so prominently attached to him, the generations after of the Imams were known as Ibn al-Rida. So going back to that hadith, the 9th Imam says, no, absolutely not. That's not the reason why he was named Ar-Rida. He was named Ar-Rida, first of all, because God bestowed upon him that name. God gave him that name. And we know that through the hadith of Rasulullah. And the wisdom behind it, so the reason is because God, but the wisdom behind it is because everyone was satisfied with him. And if you read about the akhlaq of the Imams, specifically, you'd realize that he was, he went the extra mile even to forgive and settle scores with people who wanted nothing but evil for him and nothing but destruction for him. There's a number of narrations which give us that meaning. And this is how character ethic and personality ethic culminate into one person. There's a narration that tells us, and I'll end with this, that when Harun al-Abbasi became the caliph, because of his animosity towards the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, he appointed governors and representatives that he knew would intentionally abuse them and make a hard time for them. And so one of his representatives that he had installed in Medina took a gang of people during that time and they looted the home of the 8th Imam, Al-Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. This is before he went to Khurasan. He looted it completely. I mean, imagine someone walking into your home and looting it and ransacking it. Imagine what kind of feelings that you would harbor for that person. So the times passed. The Imam moves to Khurasan. He becomes, he becomes appointed as the representative of the Caliph, Al-Ma'mun. Now, Al-Ma'mun, again, he was different. So after Harun comes Al-Ma'mun. Al-Ma'mun was a little bit different. He wanted to be diplomatic with the Imam, so he brought them closer. So what he did is he picked everyone that had engaged in the abuse of the Ahlul Bayt to punish them. This is the Caliph, Al-Ma'mun. So times went by and he was summoned to Khurasan so that the punishment can be carried out. And as he walked into this person who had ransacked the home of the Imam, as he walked into the courtyard, he saw the Imam right there sitting by the Caliph. And so imagine, when you've seen where in a courthouse where the perpetrator walks in and sees the victim. Imagine that's the kind of scene. So he basically sees the victim sitting by the judge and the executioner. And Al-Imam al-Rida alayhi salam is described in the narration as having, no matter what happened, he had a very calm demeanor. He was very calm. That was part of his personality. And again, that's something that attracted people. When you're calm, when all hell breaks loose, that's a way to win people over, part of the personality ethic. But he sees the Imam, who was the victim, turn to the Caliph, who is about to follow through with the judgment, and he whispers something to him. And so this criminal, as he's being brought in, he turns to the Caliph. He says, no matter what he tells you, don't believe him. Not knowing what the Imam was whispering to this person, not knowing what the Imam was whispering to the Caliph, the Imam was whispering, he said, I recognize this man. This is the one that came and attacked my home. Forgive him. Don't punish him. That was a long time ago. There's no need for punishment. But this man could not hear what was going on because it was being whispered. He said, no matter what he tells you, don't listen to him. Don't believe him. Do the opposite of what he's telling you. And so the Caliph al-Ma'mun says, do you know what he's saying about you? And he reveals to him. He says, but it's too late now. So, you know, that was a sign of that. That shows you how people were attracted to him, even if they were his enemy, even if they had animosity towards him. And that forgiveness that comes from the Imam is not part of the personality, it's part of the character ethic, who he was on the inside. On the inside, he was a forgiving person. When you make the decision to become a forgiving person, it doesn't matter what happens to you in life. You've already forgiven people in the past, in the present, and in the future. The Quran says to the Prophet, إِنَّا فَتَحْنَا لَكَ فَتْحًا مُبِينًا لِيَغْفِرَ لَكَ اللَّهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ. So that we have granted you a mighty conquest, so that everything in the past, present, and future is forgiven. This is the true conquest, this is the true fath that we have granted to you. And this is a manifestation of the hadith of Al-Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, who says that when you're in a position of power, when finally you've gained leverage, you know, sometimes in the relationship between an oppressor and the oppressed, there's leverage. Sometimes the oppressor has power and authority for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and then all of a sudden the tables turn. And they become in a state of need. They become in a state of poverty. They become the one that needs help. Imam Ali alayhi salam says that if you're in this situation and you begin to gain leverage over the person that hurt you, as a sign of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forgive that person. Not because they deserve it. As a sign of, take them out of the equation. As a sign of thankfulness, forgive that person. It's got nothing to do with whether they deserve it or they don't deserve it. Because whenever we're in a position to forgive, the biggest justification is they don't deserve forgiveness. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, set that ego aside for a moment as a sign of thankfulness. Because God is the one that put you in the position to be able to forgive in the first place. God is the one that gave you leverage. And the same way that leverage was not on your side in the past, it can be taken away from you easily. Because truly sovereignty, mulk, authority lies in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلِلَّهِ عَاقِبَةُ الْأُمُورِ. So knowing how to be responsible with our power, with our influence, with the leverage that we have. And when we choose to forgive, forgiveness is not about the other person, it's about us. When someone wrongs us, sometimes they've completely forgotten about it. But you're holding on to it and you're allowing it to bother you and bog you down and affect your relationships with everyone around you while that person has forgotten about it. They're not even thinking about it anymore. So forgiveness is not about the other person, it's about you. It's about relieving your own burdens of what happens to you. And so the Imam was consistent with that character ethic. And he began to attract people. He began to attract the following. And one day, Al-Ma'mun tells him, he says, I want you to go out and lead the prayers for Eid al-Adha. And so the Imam put on his best clothes, he put on his turban, and he went out and he began to perform the adhan and the iqamah. And because people were so attracted to his aura, not just his personality, but because of who he was, Al-Ma'mun all of a sudden saw that everyone went out. Even the military officers, the people that were loyal to him. So when he saw that display, he felt threatened and he felt in danger again. So he told them, come back. I've changed my mind. And narrations tell us that it was during that time in the year 203 after Hijrah that he decided to poison the Imam. He decided once and for all, I got to put this to rest, because if he keeps attracting people, what's going to happen to our rule? I'm not going to get what I really want. And so it was during those final days of Safar, brothers and sisters, that the Imam was summoned to the court of Al-Ma'mun, and it's said that a plate of poisoned grapes were put in front of him, and he was forced to eat them. He was forced to consume them. And they began to, on a night like this, they began to burn within his body. And he began to feel the pain of the burn in his body. And it was only a few moments, it only took a few moments for his soul to depart this world. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wa saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun wal 'aqibatu lil muttaqin. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our a'mal in these holy months. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring relief to all of those who are in need worldwide. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ziyarah of our master Al-Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma aghfir lil mu'minina wal mu'minat wal muslimina wal muslimat al-ahya'i minhum wal amwat tabi' baynana wa baynahum bil khayrat innaka mujibu ad-da'awat innaka qadi al-hajat innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
برای سلامتشون یه صلوات محبت بفرمایید. به علی بدین. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم.